Okay, so I need you to hear this one because I genuinely cannot believe how badly this man played himself at every single step.
Picture this. A grown man shows up at your front door, face red, voice shaking, screaming at you about a drone. Not just knocking, not just ringing the bell, but pounding on the door with both fists, hurling obscenities loud enough for the whole street to hear. And when you finally crack the door open to find out what on earth is happening, he stabs a finger in your face and tells you that you owe him $900. Right now. Today. Because your dog did what dogs do. This is where our story begins. Not at some dramatic courtroom moment, not at a screaming match between neighbors, but at a door that a woman almost did not open at all. And honestly, given everything that followed, she probably wishes she had just left him standing there a little longer.
$900 cash at the door. The audacity of this man has me speechless already.
Her name is not important. What is important is that she was a reasonable person, a good neighbor by any standard, living a quiet life with her dog in a house with an 8-foot privacy fence surrounding her backyard. That fence was not decorative. That fence was intentional. It was the kind of fence you build when you want your space, when you want your dog to run and play without the world intruding. For a while, it worked. Then her neighbor discovered drones. He had not one but two of them, large ones, the kind that are almost 5 feet across and weigh several pounds. And for reasons that are difficult to explain using any logic or basic human decency, he developed a hobby that involved flying those drones low and slow over her backyard, specifically over her dog. Not past the yard, not above the tree line, but low, buzzing, deliberately close to an animal that was terrified of the sound. She watched her dog pace and bark and panic over and over again because a grown man next door thought it was entertainment. She asked him to stop. Of course she did. She was reasonable. She was patient. She knocked on his door the way you do when you still believe the situation can be resolved like adults. He told her she did not own the air above her yard and sent her on her way. She asked again. Same answer. She called the police because at this point the drone was getting close enough to her dog that she was genuinely afraid of a collision. The officer spoke to him, asked him politely to knock it off in the interest of keeping the peace. That, it turned out, was exactly the wrong approach. Being asked to stop seemed to energize him. The flybys got more frequent, not less.
The police asked him nicely, and he took it as an invitation. This is the kind of neighbor that makes you understand why people move.
So when the dog finally had enough, when he finally leaped up and snatched that drone right out of the air and reduced it to a pile of buzzing plastic and broken propellers, it is genuinely hard to feel bad about it. The dog did not scheme. The dog did not plan. The dog was a living creature that had been harassed for weeks by a loud, low-flying machine, piloted by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. At some point, instinct takes over. At some point, enough is enough. But the neighbor did not see it that way. He showed up furious, demanded $900 on the spot, and when she closed the door in his face, he called the police and told them she had refused him access to her yard to retrieve the drone. That was not true. He had never asked. He had demanded money, not access. The officers came, saw the drone still sitting in the yard where the dog had lost interest in it the moment it stopped moving, heard both sides, and left without incident. She thought that was probably the end of it. She was wrong. A sheriff's deputy arrived at her door with a summons. Her neighbor had decided to take her to small claims court over a drone he had spent weeks using to terrorize an animal. The audacity was almost artistic. She could have panicked. Instead, she made a phone call. Her mother-in-law worked as a paralegal secretary, which meant she had access to something most people facing a surprise lawsuit do not have, which was a free consultation with an actual attorney. She sat down with him, explained the situation, and watched his expression shift from professional neutrality to what could only be described as barely contained amusement. He told her the neighbor was going to have a very hard time making this case. Then he told her something that changed everything. Her neighborhood, it turned out, was located within 5 miles of an airport. Not a major commercial hub, but an airport nonetheless. And under Federal Aviation Administration regulations, that proximity matters. Flying a drone near an airport without proper registration and clearance is not a gray area. It is a federal issue. The attorney explained the relevant rules, mentioned that flying out of line of sight and at significant altitude compounded the problem further, and then, almost as an aside, suggested she look into whether her neighbor was actually registered to operate drones of that size.
Oh no. He flew his unregistered drone near an airport and then took her to court. He walked into this himself.
She called the FAA hotline that same week. She explained the situation calmly and thoroughly. She mentioned the two large drones, mentioned the flights that went several thousand feet into the air, mentioned the proximity to the airport, and asked whether her neighbor had ever registered to fly. She gave them her contact information and waited. They called her back. That callback alone told her what she needed to know. They were looking into it. She did not know how far it would go, but something had been set in motion that her neighbor almost certainly did not anticipate when he filed that summons. She walked into that small claims courtroom, prepared in a way her neighbor had clearly not expected. She brought both police reports. She brought photographs of her backyard, of the privacy fence, of the layout of the property. She brought her dog's medical bills because, yes, catching a 5-pound piece of machinery had consequences that required veterinary attention: x-rays, a dental exam, sedation, medication. She brought short videos she had taken over the preceding weeks of the drone, doing slow passes over her terrified dog. She had done her homework, and it showed. Her neighbor had a theory. He presented it to the judge with what must have been remarkable confidence. His argument was that she had deliberately installed a picnic table in her backyard to serve as a platform, that she had somehow trained her dog to use it as a launching pad, and that the entire drone catching incident was a calculated act of malicious property destruction that she had engineered in advance. She had, in fact, recently purchased a picnic table. She had purchased it because she wanted somewhere to sit outside and eat her lunch, like a normal human being.
He told a judge that she trained her dog to catch a drone out loud in a courtroom. I need a moment.
She kept her composure. She explained to the judge that the repeated low-altitude flights had been causing her dog genuine anxiety, that the behavior had escalated despite multiple requests to stop, and that on the day in question, the dog had acted out of a distressed and provoked instinct, not malicious training. She also raised a point that landed clearly, which was that a drone of that size and weight colliding with or being ingested by a dog could have caused serious injury or death. She was not just defending herself. She was explaining that her neighbor's hobby had been putting her animal at risk for months. The judge listened to all of it. Then he ruled. She did not have to pay her neighbor a single dollar. Instead, her neighbor was ordered to pay her just under $2,000 in veterinary costs. The x-rays, the dental work, the sedation, the medication, all of it was now his financial responsibility. The court also issued a ban prohibiting him from flying over her property. She went home, ordered trail cameras for both the front and backyard, and installed them within the week. Given how upset he seemed on his way out of the courtroom, she was not taking any chances. And somewhere in the background of all of this, the FAA was still making calls. That last detail is worth sitting with for a moment. He came to her. He flew his drones deliberately over her yard for weeks, ignored every request to stop, let the situation escalate until a dog got involved, and then marched into a courthouse expecting to walk out with $900. Instead, he walked out owing $2,000, banned from doing the one thing he apparently cared about on her property, and potentially facing federal scrutiny for how he had been operating those drones all along. Every single consequence in this story was a direct result of choices he made freely and repeatedly.
He handed her every single piece of ammunition she needed. Every police report, every vet bill, every flyby she caught on video. He built his own case against himself.
There is something deeply satisfying about a story where the person who refuses to listen, who doubles down when asked to stop, who escalates a petty situation into a legal one, ends up on the wrong side of every single outcome. She did not set out to ruin his hobby. She asked him to stop. He refused. She called the police. He ramped it up. He filed a lawsuit. She prepared a counter case. He showed up to court with a conspiracy theory about a picnic table. She showed up with documentation, medical records, and video evidence. He left owing money he never expected to pay. If any of this sounds familiar to you, if you have ever had a neighbor who treated a simple, reasonable request like a personal challenge, then you already know why this story feels so satisfying to hear. Sometimes the system works exactly the way it is supposed to. Sometimes patience and documentation and one well placed phone call to the right federal agency makes all the difference. Subscribe, like, and drop a comment below and let me know what you would have done in her shoes because this one is worth talking about.